Hello, and this is a lecture about professional cover letters, also known as application letters. Let's be honest, a fairly dull topic for many people perhaps, but nonetheless essential for you to master if your applications in the future, your written applications, are to help you stand out from the competition, which is of course the whole point of them. So what is the purpose of a professional cover letter? In summary, it's to start the process of differentiating you from the crowd of other hopefuls. It must answer the key question, why me? This you achieve by showing that you possess more of what the employer wants than the other applicants manage to demonstrate via their letters and their applications. More specifically, you achieve this by focusing on two critical areas. Let's take a quick look at what those areas are. Firstly, we need to master the basics of drafting a professional letter. And secondly, we need to customize each and every letter that we send. In other words, we need to target it at a particular organization for a particular opportunity. Now, this rule, customizing every letter that we send, applies whether we're reacting to a job advert or whether we're writing a letter in order to approach proactively target organizations who are not advertising publicly. In a moment, I'll be showing you some real cover letters with the intention of helping you analyze where they, and therefore you, can improve. But let's firstly spend a moment on what's actually meant by mastering the basics. Now, to do this, we need to bring up a checklist. If you're not already familiar with this cover letter version of the checklist, which we've devised as a useful tool for you, you will soon, very soon, need to become familiar with it. If you look firstly down the left-hand side column underneath the title Key Benefits to the Reader, you'll see that the recommendations are grouped according to three key aims. Firstly, we have to provide a professional layout so that it's quick and easy for a reader to find the relevant information that they are most interested in. You'll notice if you glance at each of the guideline tips in that top section, if you read across the rows, all of them are tips relating to good layout or formatting. Secondly, second section, we need to ensure that we use professional standard language. Now, just so we're clear, neither of these things, layout nor expression, will actually get us invited to the next stage of the selection process, typically an interview. However, if we're assessed as less than perfect on either layout or expression, we have to assume that the reader, the recruiter, who's likely to be skim reading dozens, if not hundreds of other applications in between their other responsibilities, of course, will have simply lost interest in our letter. Meaning, of course, that it's likely we don't get to showcase to them the third and arguably most important section on the checklist down the bottom there, namely providing evidence of our key strengths, our key interests, etc. Okay, we'll come back to using this checklist a bit later in the lecture, but let's take our first look at some sample cover letters. Now, these are real efforts, by the way. As such, it's critical that I firstly point out for you that the initial two examples are below the standard necessary of being seriously competitive. I'll try to point out, of course, at least the main reasons why this is the case so that you know not to fall into the same traps yourself. Let's have a look at our first sample. Take a moment to skim read the letter. After all, that's all the recruiter's going to do. I'll give you a few seconds for that. Okay, that's plenty of time, or at least plenty of time that a recruiter would spend having a glance over and seeing how interested they may be in finding out more about us or about this applicant. If I were to read out for you, because you're not looking at it at the moment, the checklist tips relating to layout and formatting, What do you think? Is it only 1 page long? Does the layout look well spaced to you? Is the font professional? The choice of font. If there's any highlighting or formatting techniques used, such as centering, indenting, bolding, underlining, etc., have they used too much of it, or is it just about right? Are all the sentences, all the paragraphs kept brief? Did they remember to include a heading? That all looks okay, doesn't it? Big tick for layout? Well, remember, okay simply, unfortunately, is not good enough if we're to be highly competitive in a selection process, where, let's be honest, maybe 5%, if you're lucky, 10% of applicants only will actually get invited to the next stage of the selection process. Let's take a closer look, a closer look at what's good and perhaps where it falls down a little bit, this letter. So, starting with layout, which is the first section on the checklist, pretty good. If you look from the top left-hand corner downwards, that's pretty much the standard as to how you need to lay out a professional letter. The recommendation is you follow this format. In other words, you include your contact details, the date that you're writing the letter, and their contact details, pretty much as shown. Heading. Important always, please, to use a heading, any type of letter that you're sending, but make it accurate. It so turns out that Xstrata, that this applicant was wanting to get a placement with, doesn't actually offer internships. What they call it, which this applicant should have found out from their research, is the Xstrata Vacation Employment Program. The suspicion is that maybe they just cut and paste the same heading between all of their letters. Either way, make it accurate, but use a heading. Dear whomever it may concern. Another one of our checklist tips, of course, is to always, where possible, use a personalized greeting. Realistically, this isn't always made available to us, this information, so what we need to do, and as part of standing out from what all of our competitors are doing, we need to typically pick up the phone and actually, amongst other things, ask who's handling this opportunity, how do we check the spelling of their name. But while, of course, you're on the phone to the company, it's a perfect opportunity for you to ask some further research questions that will help you further customize your letter. Most of your competitors will not do this. It's an advantage you will have. If we move into the first paragraph, you notice that very blank space there where the applicant has indented. Does raise a bit of a question mark over their attention to detail. Typically business communications, bit of a generalization, but we left align all of the information. They've done that nicely with the rest of their paragraphs. They should have picked up in their proofreading and corrected that for this opening paragraph. Perhaps more significantly is what they've written in their opening sentence. I'm highly interested in applying for the role of an intern with your company. Well, obviously, because that's why you use a heading. In other words, that first sentence is redundant. There's a concern over some of the expression that the applicant has used throughout the letter, but for example in this first paragraph. They're claiming they've got a background experience in electrical engineering. They're going steady into the second year. And here's the first typo, they're pursing the interest. No, they're not. They're pursuing the interest. Again, this stuff should have been picked up and fixed before they actually submitted their letter. If the company cares in any way about attention to detail, then this applicant is already letting themselves down badly. But coming after the word pursing or pursuing, I'm pursuing the interest of requiring a bachelor in engineering, which involves a major in electrical. Just as a phrase, what are they actually saying? In fact, can I suggest that the whole of that first paragraph, which is 55 or so words, really, they could have communicated all of that in about 8 words. I'm a second year UTS electrical engineering student. Okay? What we're really talking about here, of course, is first impressions. Will your first impression be average, below average, like this one, or above average? And of course, the first impression is the collection of first how the letter looks, layout, the heading that we use, whether we've personalized the greeting, dear whoever, and then that first sentence, that first paragraph, and so on. This is the first impression. Unfortunately, this applicant has let themselves down badly. Remember, communication is the number one criteria for recruiters, frankly, of all graduates, including recruiters of technical students. We have to make the first impression strong. If the recruiter, the reader, has not yet lost interest, let's move into the start of the second paragraph. They're claiming now that they've the capability to work in teams that vary in size and have acquired a good set of communication skills. Well, you need to ask yourself, to what extent does that differentiate this applicant from, let's be honest, every other university student that works in teams of all different sizes? And of course, you know, they're university students. They've got good communication skills. It's a case of how good. Okay, so might sound harsh, but we can pretty much assume that because of all the issues raised so far, the reader has effectively stopped engaging with this letter. I want to move on to the next letter and start picking up on some other key points, but pretty much they've moved on. The issues around attention to detail in summary, expression difficulties, and ultimately they're offering nothing at the start of the letter that actually sets them apart from every other applicant. It falls, in other words, a long way short of standard. For your information, this application that was submitted by a student recently was therefore rated as poor by their tutor and allocated a very low mark. Let's move on to the next sample. Okay, I'll give you a moment to yet again, of course, have a quick look, quick skim over it, as if you were the recruiter. Okay, well, at first blush, once again, the letter appears professionally laid out, doesn't it? All those criteria off the checklist. Will it fare better this time around with the expression and the language that they use? And ultimately, will it secure the applicant an interview by providing sufficient relevant evidence? Which is, of course, repeating the purpose of submitting a letter. You'll notice that where they've put in the contact details of the person they're writing to, they've just put the name Merrin Stewart. So they've worked out, maybe it was in the advert, maybe they've taken the initiative to phone up, and that's the name of the person handling the vacancy. They've then put Dear Merrin Stewart. Now it's professional to actually include a title. So what we also need to find out is it Mr. Merrin Stewart? Is it Mrs. Ms.? Are they Dr. Stewart? So it would be Dear Dr. Stewart, not Dear Merrin Stewart. It's too impersonal for what's a professional, it's too informal for what's a professional letter. Again, it implies that this applicant didn't bother to actually check perhaps whether Merrin was male or female, but it certainly was a missed opportunity. How's this applicant's expression in relation to the first one? If we revisit the checklist, we need to make sure, of course, that all of our spelling is correct, that we're using Australian, not American English, that grammar and punctuation are 100% correct. Of course, we need to double check, as mentioned, all of our application documents, resumes, letters, online applications. We need to eliminate all of those errors. What are the other checklist criteria? Did they use clear and direct language? Have they used appropriate tenses? Present tense for current experiences, the past tense for things that have previously happened to them. Have they used action verbs? A couple of examples given on the checklist. Liaised, organised, strong verbs that imply strong levels of competence. You can Google if you want to access more action verbs that you can possibly use in your written documents. Have they, if they've used any acronyms, have they made sure they've explained those clearly? I don't think there's any acronyms in this letter. And finally, did they use the personalised greeting, which we've already touched on. There are, of course, though, some expression difficulties, shall we say, with this letter. For example, in that first paragraph, do you see where it says, "Suffice it to say, my interest in the field of mechatronics is no doubt extensive." In the second paragraph, past exploits with extracurricular activities have incited knowledge into this field. These are not clear. They're certainly not clear communications. Frankly, they're off-putting to a reader. What are you actually trying to communicate to them? Start of the third paragraph. My current studies have afforded me more technical knowledge in mechatronics. More than what? More than who? We need to be clear. Following on from that, resultantly, I have also been, is that even a word? It's certainly not a common word. We need to be using common but clear professional language. In the final paragraph, feel free to contact me. A little bit too informal again, I'm afraid, too casual for a professional letter. At the end of the day, if they're interested, they're going to contact you, but we don't need to call it an interview meeting. Just an interview is fine. So again, if we were to pick through, we'd find lots and lots of expression areas which unfortunately let this candidate down a little bit. In particular, where they've just not been 100% clear as to what it is that they are offering to the employer. I suppose as a side thing, the strong recommendation for all of you is look out for, beware free but substandard internet dictionaries, internet thesauruses. The recommendation will be to get hold of a decent one because you're going to keep needing it for all of your future applications. Something like the Oxford English Dictionary, perhaps the Macquarie Dictionary, Roget's Thesaurus, a quality dictionary or thesaurus, not the free stuff that's available online. You might get value for money if you use that, but it won't be necessarily good enough for professional letters. It is a shame that the expression, the layout was fine, but the expression has let this candidate down because they have actually got some quite interesting skills and experiences. You know, reference the Team Solar Car Challenge in the second paragraph. Let's look for a moment at the third or penultimate paragraph. Whereas in the opening paragraph they claimed extensive interest in mechatronics, but unfortunately provided zero evidence, here they've at least attempted to be specific about at least one relevant system, SolidWorks, and how this will be of direct use to the employer. That's great. The reference, or their reference, would have been even more convincing if it had linked to a specific instance of when they'd applied their SolidWorks foundation knowledge. Maybe if they'd detailed a project within one of their uni subjects or similar. Directly underneath, but still in the penultimate paragraph, the applicants made 3 claims that they're hardworking, motivated, and up for a challenge. But which of those 3 do they actually provide any evidence of? So as a key tip for your future cover letters, don't try to address too many selection criteria. Focus on just a small number and ensure you provide evidence for each of those by linking them to a specific experience you've had. So let's say this applicant's research into this organisation, EY, Ernst & Young, had thrown up that EY particularly value hard work, say. Their sentence might now have read something like, I'm a diligent worker, as evidenced by my work as a barista every Saturday and Sunday, as well as being a full-time student. They're at least making a link between what they're claiming and some experience or other. Merely alluding to other strengths or competencies in the way that they do about motivated and up for a challenge, unfortunately has no value in your cover letter. Instead, use that space to provide more evidence for the priority areas. There's a couple more points I'd like to highlight about this sample letter. Firstly, did you notice how at the start of the second paragraph, the applicant highlights their lack of any professional experience? The tip here is don't magnify your weaknesses for them. At the end of the day, it's their job to establish your appropriate levels of competence. But instead of magnifying weaknesses, use, again, what limited space you do have to showcase whichever strengths you have that are especially relevant. Focus on the positive. Secondly, this applicant rounds off their letter by looking forward to beginning their career as an engineer at Ernst & Young. If you remember back in their heading, they made reference to seeking an engineering vacation employment. And in paragraph 1, they spoke enthusiastically of becoming an engineer, then referenced the engineering role you currently have available, your most recent project tender. What's wrong with all that, you might say? Isn't it a great thing to express genuine enthusiasm and so on? Well, yes, it is. However, it's also critical to do some proper research into each and every organisation you plan to apply to. Certainly if you're not going to waste everybody's time. You see, Ernst & Young, unfortunately for this applicant, while they do employ people with engineering backgrounds, that much would have been clear to them reading just the advert for their vacation employment program. Unfortunately for them, EY are not an engineering firm. They're a professional services firm, something which should have been, let's be honest, quickly apparent if the applicant had even done some cursory online research into their website or anywhere else. So right from the start of the letter, the perception to the recruiter is, here's an engineering student who's after some experience. Any experience will do, but who hasn't bothered to actually find out what we at Ernst & Young do. Of course, the result of that is going to be straight into the no pile. Unfortunately for students who send out applications that are not researched and not customized, every employer wants people who really want to work for them in particular and can explain why and can provide evidence in areas that they think are high priority. My third point about this letter would refer to your opening paragraphs in future. Definitely avoid starting your opening paragraph with the phrase, "my name is," but try also to avoid opening with what you're studying and where you're studying it. Now, this is not me advising you that this information has no relevance. Clearly, it may well have relevance to say what you're studying at UTS. However, if the majority of your competitors are beginning their cover letters in this way, and I can assure you that they are, then wouldn't you say that all of those people are failing from the off to create a standout first impression, something that differentiates them? As a general rule, of course, doing the same as everyone else is likely to get us the same outcome as them. In other words, no invite to the next stage of the selection process, the interview. We have to differentiate ourselves in a positive way. So let's take that as a cue to clarify what the aim is of the various sections of our professional cover letters. So, opening paragraph. The aim of the opening paragraph is, if I were to summarize it as anything, it's to hook the interest of the reader. Remember, they're wading quickly, very quickly through dozens, hundreds sometimes of letters and applications. There is no single way of hooking their interest. If there was, guess what? We'd be advising it, and then everybody's letters would end up reading the same, which would defeat the object. Nonetheless, one of the key areas for you to explore for your future letters is aim to make clear why you're enthusiastic about this opportunity. Now that might what attracts you to the broader industry or field in which the organisation operates. It may be demonstrating the research you've done into that particular organisation and why that excites you. Or it could be the role itself, the specific opportunity. What about that from your research hooks into your interests, your strong areas of interest? If we do that successfully, we're not only creating a good first impression in our opening paragraph. More specifically, well, we're doing a number of things, frankly, that tap into key selection criteria. You're demonstrating, as mentioned, that you were motivated to do some proper research. And again, most of your competitors won't have done this. Secondly, you've linked your research to your personal interests and aspirations, and you're communicating those to the employer. They're interested in this. They're not just recruiting a skill set, they're recruiting a person. Thirdly, you're demonstrating that you've got good competence in the number one area that they're interested in, good communication, at least written communication, by doing it clearly and concisely. Let's move on to the middle paragraphs. What's the aim of those? Having created a great first impression and hooked their interest? Well, this is where, in the middle paragraphs, we start the process of providing some evidence. We show how our key strengths match the priority needs of the organization. The key caveat here, the thing to look out for and watch out for, is don't just make claims. Instead, make sure that you're actually linking your claim, as mentioned, to specific evidence. It doesn't matter. You can draw from your various working experiences in related or completely unrelated work. You can draw from experiences from your extracurricular activities. Again, it doesn't matter which they are. The mere fact that you've got them and can show their relevance is what's important here. Or, of course, you might draw from education. Yes, a lot of your competitors will be referring to uni subjects that they're doing that are largely similar, perhaps, projects that they're doing as well. But nonetheless, it's fine to draw from any of those experiences. The important thing is demonstrate competence, don't just claim it. To summarize, because you only have limited space in your one-page cover letter, don't please fall into the trap of trying to cover 10, 12, 15 different selection criteria and addressing none of them satisfactorily. The tip would be focus on only a small number, maybe as few as 3 or 5 in total, and for each of those, provide the relevant evidence. Okay, let's take a look at a better sample cover letter and see what we can pick out of those. Take a moment to have the usual quick look over the sample. Okay, layout again is okay. You'll notice that they've chosen to put their contact details over on the right hand margin instead of the left. That's okay as well, but layout's good. They've included a heading. First thing to point out there is good. If it's a job advert that has a reference number, include that. It will just help the reader to work out from your heading what it is that you're actually writing to them about. However, it's a bit of a mouthful that they've put in their heading there. The student here thought they were doing the right thing by simply cutting and pasting the heading exactly as it appeared in the relevant advert for this opportunity. Unfortunately for them, the advert wasn't proofread. Yes, folks, recruiters and employers are allowed to make grammatical mistakes or whatever. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury as applicants. But common sense really should have told this student. They're applying to somebody who's based in Mascot, in Sydney. It probably would not be necessary to write Australia in Sydney, Australia. Not only does it not make sense, it's just excessive amount of detail. The important thing was the internship program and the reference number. We've already talked about to whom it may concern and how that's a massive missed opportunity to personalize your letter and do further research to further customize the whole letter. What about though if we get into the body of the letter itself? Now, the first paragraph by this applicant is a good attempt at what we were just talking about a moment ago, linking the research that they'd done into this particular organisation, Eton, with their own key interests. So as well as demonstrating their research into Eton Corporation, they should have explicitly mentioned, perhaps in their heading, perhaps in the opening paragraph, which specific function or functions of this company that they'd prefer to work in. This is because the advert, if you'd seen it, for this particular opportunity mentioned that assignments would be available in specific engineering areas such as services, operations, design, lean, manufacturing, operational excellence, quality, supply chain, and so on. The student would have helped the recruiter if they'd said which one or more than one areas were of a special interest to them and why. Their second paragraph, again, good. It makes a fist of linking what this particular opportunity or what Eton especially need. And of course, they've based that on their research from bothering to talk to representatives from Eton at the recent Careers Expo. Hopefully they've also done some in-depth online and other types of research as well. So they've linked what the opportunity needs with a small number of specific things covered in their studies so far. So what they write is, my strong academic record demonstrates that I'll be able to handle any challenge I face during the internship program, and also demonstrates my willingness to learn. Does it? Does it demonstrate that? I can buy the claim, the latter claim. Yeah, strong academic record demonstrates a willingness to learn. Okay. Assuming, of course, that this applicant's grades in the resume that they're directing them to are indeed strong, then that's good. But unfortunately, it just doesn't follow to claim that achieving good academic grades automatically means someone's going to meet any work-related challenge that they face in the future. This is a classic example, in other words, of an applicant claiming but failing to actually substantiate their claim, and therefore, unfortunately, it has zero value. Use the very limited space in your letters to provide evidence, not baseless claims. Which, by the way, is a trap which most of your competitors will be falling into, and therefore another clear competitive advantage if you can successfully apply this tip. There are, of course, other improvements which could be made to this letter. There always are some. Hopefully you've picked up where the language and expression is a little tortuous in places. There's some sloppy grammar, even 2 or 3 typos. Hopefully you've picked up on those, and you've committed to eliminating those from every one of your future letters by proofreading properly. In summary, though, it is a better attempt than our first 2 samples that we looked at. Better at engaging the interest of the recruiter by linking the applicant's interests to what Eton are seeking in a university student intern. Also, better by showcasing their key strengths via highlighting some of the experiences which hopefully are going to start to differentiate them from their peers. However, we need now to actually look at the original advert to see how this letter and how most cover letters could be further strengthened. Let's scroll down and look at the advert. Okay, so if we look at the priority selection criteria as described in the advert, and this is without any additional research that you're doing, when we return to the letter, I'm going to run through each of the key selection criteria in turn, and you make an assessment. Did this applicant provide, not just reference them, but did they provide specific sufficient evidence to be certain of being called for an interview? So first of all, what jumped out from the advert was leadership. That is not explicitly referenced anywhere or evidenced anywhere in this letter, is it? Next, they had to have be offer a relevant study area. Well, tick, yep, that's done, well done. Thirdly, a strong academic record. Again, yes, if that is demonstrated in the accompanying resume. Nonetheless, I think what they should have done here is confirm this in the letter as well, as opposed to just referring them through to the resume. The issue here is we never know 100% if the recruiter is consulting our resume or our cover letter first, where both are required. The next criteria that was needed in the advert, a willingness to learn. Well, yep, we've already addressed that. The next one, taking initiative. Well, for all we know, this applicant may be excellent in this area. They may rank very lowly. The point being, it's impossible for a recruiter to judge, as yet again, unfortunately, there's no attempt to provide any evidence of their ability to take the initiative. Next up, excellent written skills. Well, we've already established a degree of competence in this area, but for the reasons pointed out, certainly not excellence, unfortunately. Oral communication. Well, in the third paragraph, you'll remember there's claim to have developed these by working at Porto, but it's not a convincing link, is it? Just merely saying, I have excellent oral communication skills and I've worked at Porto is not making that link. You need to actually be more specific than that. Presentation skills was the final criteria, I think, in the advert. Yet again, unfortunately, the letter is silent about this. So do you see, while at first look this letter seemed pretty strong, unfortunately it's actually not that relevant, at least according to the criteria that we're in the actual job advert. So to conclude, and let's return to the checklist to help us review this. All of the tips in the checklist will help you begin the challenging yet essential task of differentiating yourself by ensuring you make no avoidable errors, with your layout, with your formatting, with your expression, and so on. You have to get those right. More positively, following all of our tips on how to include specific evidence in the lower part of the checklist, specific evidence against the most important selection criteria, should give your cover letters every chance of creating a very favourable first impression. Good luck with your drafting. I hope that's been of some use.